Hi everyone, welcome to the Creatives Across Borders podcast with your host Bayo. Flavia Drago is a New York Times best-selling author and illustrator from Mexico. She is best known for her signature use of horror characters like vampires, witches, monsters for captivating picture books. Her fascination and works also form the context of her current PhD at Anglia Ruskin University, where she is researching horror as a genre in children's picture books. In this interview, we talk through her journey from the start and across different countries. We also examine topical issues like how her works are perceived across cultures given the varying connotations of horror-like subjects. Plus, we touch on what spooks Flavia, if any, her perspectives on horror as a genre, current and future projects, agents, and much more. Enjoy! So, thank you once again, Flavia, for joining me on the podcast to talk through your journey. It's a pleasure to have you once again. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, nice. Good to hear. Yeah, so I'll get started with your background. Tell us about Flavia. What's your background? How would you describe yourself?
So my background is I studied graphic design. I was born and raised in Mexico City. That's where I spent my whole childhood. And then I studied graphic design because I wanted to basically do whatever my sister was doing. She's 11 years older than me. And when she was working on her university projects, it all seemed quite fun. She was taking pictures, she was drawing, she was doing logos, she was using Photoshop. So I thought, well, she's making a living with that. So I decided to study graphic design. And then when I started working as a graphic designer, I kind of noticed that the work wasn't always as creative as I thought it was going to be. And little by little, my interest in illustration began to grow. But in Mexico, we don't have any illustration courses. We don't have a BA in illustration. So it was a very long process to find my way to become an illustrator. I did a small trip to Barcelona. And then I got a scholarship to do a course in Paris, and then I did an MA in children's book illustration at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. And after that, I got my first picture book published. That's very short. It took around 10 years.
Okay, that's an interesting summary, though. But in terms of your journey, right, Flavia, so you've talked about shadowing your sister, basically wanting to be like her, and getting into graphic design in that process. I'm curious, though, was there a point in your childhood that you loved drawing? How did this whole drawing start? Was it right when you were trying to shadow your sister, or you had been, scribbling things or doodling things beforehand?
I always loved drawing. Always, always, always. I think as a child, I was very shy. I was not very eloquent. I was not very good with words. I didn't know how to express my feelings. So drawing was for me a way in which I could express how I was feeling. And I would just enjoy doing it all the time. I think I would my dad is an architect and he had his fancy markers, and I would steal his markers to do my drawings. And then I would ask him to teach me how to write and draw different things. So I still have some of those old sketchbooks. And then when I was about 8-10 years old, I filled a whole sketchbook with different drawings of animals. I love drawing animals. So it's something I've always done, and it's been with me forever. But the thing is that when I was doing university, I didn't even consider that I could be an illustrator because I didn't know anyone who did that. So after graduating from uni, I discovered that I could do it.
Interesting. And when you say do it, you mean, you know, be a professional illustrator, make a living from being an illustrator, right?
Yes, I
Mm,
didn't know how it was done, so I went online and I found other friends who were illustrators, and they told me, you could go to book fairs, you could promote your work in book fairs. There is a very big book fair in Mexico. It's called FIL in Guadalajara, FIL, Feria Internacional del Libro, International Book Fair,
okay.
and you could make appointments with publishers. And then when I traveled to Barcelona, I discovered that the picture book industry was bigger. There was the Bologna Book Fair, which is happening right now, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
there. So I'm missing out on the fun. So little by little, I began to understand and learn more about making books for children.
Hmm. Okay, you touched on something which I found interesting, which is, your MA was in illustrations, right? Children's book illustration or picture book illustrations. I mean, it's tempting for someone like me who, I mean, I have an engineering background. I don't draw. I just, I program and I write stories. But it's tempting to think that when it comes to illustration, it's just something that comes to you naturally. So when I hear people like yourself, and there's also my first guest, Tita Beredo, who also did an MA in children's book illustration here in the UK. When I hear people like you say, you went to school and took an MA or even BSc in illustration, it makes me wonder, is there a theory or a science to illustrations then beyond just, I have a natural instinct to draw and I know how to draw. Is there something else that you learn when you take these courses that stands you out?
Well, the love for drawing has to
Mm-hmm.
be there,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn by doing it repeatedly. What these MA teach you to do is to be disciplined about it and to be
Mm,
critical about what you draw, so that you can then use your drawing skills for communicating.
mm,
And picture books, the thing about picture books is that the role of illustration is not just a decorative one. Illustration is integrated, is part of the story.
true.
So in that sense, is you need to learn how to craft stories that begin with the illustration. They don't begin
Ah,
with the written word.
interesting.
And you do that by drawing a lot, by experimenting a lot, and then by being self-critical. And I think in my experience, learning or studying others people's work
Mm-hmm.
uh, is useful, because then you can see, or you can begin to understand, why is this successful? Why is this fun? How are they using the page turn to create tension? How are they using the composition and the color to convey emotions?
Mm,
So I find it useful, but definitely going to school is not the only way to become an illustrator. You can become an illustrator by doing it all the time
mm-hmm.
as well.
Hmm.
The thing that also can be quite convenient is that there's a network. So you get to know other artists, you create friendships, and then from those friendships and from that networking, you can get some projects, you can create new projects. So that's
Mm-hmm.
another integral part of being an illustrator. It's not you isolated, it's
Yeah.
you and a network.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean that answers my question, and I think that also leads to my next question. So, going to school, having an MA, you were able to build for yourself, a network of people, of professionals within the same industry. And you talked about earlier that I think it was while you were on your MA, but that you got that break for your children's book, right? How did that come about? Yeah, can you talk us through that, please?
Yes.
Mhm.
Um, So in 2016, I applied to do the MA in Children's Picture Books at Anglia Ruskin University.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's honestly the best decision I've ever made in my life. For a while, I was working as an illustrator, but I wanted to do my own stories. And a way for me to find the time to do that was to force me to do that by doing a course. So doing the course was an excuse to get myself into some sort of discipline to write and illustrate my own stories.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst I was on the course, I developed a few stories. I did one that had a rabbit and a squirrel. I did another one with a princess. And then you also have to tailor your portfolio, different samples of your work. And one day I got an email from Deidre McDermott from Walker Books asking me if I wanted to go to their office because they wanted to talk with me. And to me, that email was amazing because I love the books they make. I think Walker Books makes beautiful books, but not just beautiful books, books that are interesting or books that are fun. And they have artists that I admire a lot. They work with John Klassen. They work with Anushka Ayipus. They work with Julia Sarda. They work with many, many illustrators who are wonderful. So I got that email and I was very excited. And by the end of the interview, they told me, "We like your stories, but we're not sure that any of these work for us to make it into a picture book because we have similar things in our catalog already. Do you have something else?" And I had in the back of my head, I had a story of a ghost who was very shy. But I thought it was too niche because usually when you think about books about monsters, you think they will only sell during Halloween. So I didn't even think about pitching that idea to them. But I just wanted to convince them with anything. And I said, well, I have this idea for a ghost. And they liked it. And we began to work in the idea. And they offered me a contract. So it was most that they trusted that I could do it, but I didn't. When I signed the contract, we didn't have we had like a very vague idea of where I wanted to take the book.
Okay.
And they looked at my portfolio, and we were trying to use all of those ingredients to make the book that then became Gustavo the Shy Ghost.
Interesting. I mean, that's good to hear. So just to clarify a few things. So this was in the course of your MA, right? Does that mean that in the course of your MA, you were, sharing your work? So I'm just trying to find what brought about that conversation in the first place. How did they know about your works? Was it the case of, someone in school had introduced them, or how did they come about you in the first place?
Okay, I see. Walker Books has so every year Walker Books organize this award called the Sebastian Walker Award.
Okay.
And they give this award to the most promising student from the MA. And usually they interview some of the people whose work they like. They interview them. So they do go and they have a look at all the portfolios, and then they decide which ones they think they can work with. And I didn't win the Sebastian Walker Award, but they did offer me a contract, which was much better in the end. So the contact did come because of the MA, because they organized this contest.
Oh, okay. And then you applied for it, and then you weren't shortlisted, but at least it was enough to get in front of them.
You don't apply for the contest just because you are in the MA. You are kind of you could be selected as to be the Sebastian Walker Prize
Hmm.
winner. Like
Ah,
anyone who is doing the MA could be the winner of the Sebastian Walker Award.
okay.
Hmm.
Ah, okay,
And it's just
interesting.
for people who are in the MA. It's a prize in
Mm-hmm.
collaboration. It's a partnership, Walker Books and Anglia Ruskin University. And I think that works for them because they've done a lot of books with former graduates from the MA. So it's a
That's smart.
win-win situation.
Yeah, that's a smart one. Oh, now I get. Interesting. So, considering that, then your work with Walker Books, what would you consider your big break? Yeah, would that count as one of your big breaks? And if yes, do you have any other big breaks or standout moments in your career that you'd like to share with us?
Well, definitely publishing my first picture book was the biggest break I've ever had. Basically, that book, Gustavo, has been very successful, I think. It was a New York Times bestseller for a few weeks in 2021.
Hmm.
I won the Klaus Flugge Prize because of that book.
Hmm.
But before Gustavo, I think I had another big breakthrough, which was in 2013. I started doing an illustration course in Paris at the School of Applied Arts. And during that time, Hermes, the fashion, well, it's like a luxury brand. They
Okay.
make lots of really nice things,
Hmm.
expensive furniture, um, things for horses, scarves, lots and lots of luxury items.
Hmm.
They were in a partnership with NSAD,
Hmm.
and there was a workshop where you could design one of their scarves. And if they liked your design, maybe they could buy it and they could make it.
Hmm.
So when I was in Paris, I had like I was working on a personal project which was drawing comics of my everyday life,
Hmm.
just about my experiences, and I was integrating typography and illustration in the same. It was like a comic every day, like
Okay.
and obviously when the workshop started, they didn't know anything about me. I had been in school for 1 year,
Hmm.
where most of the students had been there for, I think it was 3 years. So they didn't know my work at all, and I showed them that series of drawings that I was doing about my everyday occurrences in Paris, and
Hmm.
they told me that I should think about using that as inspiration for designing the scarf. And so I did that, and they liked it. And I worked on many different versions, and by the end of the workshop, they bought my design. So the scarf got printed and made, and it was sold worldwide. So that was another big
Hmm.
break, and I think that gave me the confidence to say, I'm an illustrator, and they like this type of drawings which are very personal and very graphic. Maybe this is how I should approach my work from now on.
Hmm.
So that kind of shift me into one direction, because before doing that I was doing lots of different things. I just wanted to know which way I should be working, and that kind of gave me a little hint. Maybe this should be the way you should follow, and
Hmm.
that's what I did.
Hmm. Interesting. In terms of that, though, was that well? Since that was a mirror of your everyday life, it didn't have the vampires and stuff as at then, right? Had you discovered your love for vampires and drawing of vampires as at then?
No, my love for horror characters was always there. It's just I didn't consider that I would be using horror characters for making picture books. And then it developed organically.
Okay.
After I worked on Gustavo, my agent called me and she asked me, Flavia, what do you want to do now? And I didn't know what to do. I had the first picture book went really well, and I was like, oh no, now I need to work on the second one, which is even scarier because I've done it once, but I need to do it more than once.
Yeah.
And so my agent was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And during that time, I baked a cake with my sister and I posted all of the stories on Instagram. And it was quite a complicated cake. It's a unicorn cake. It had 5 different layers with 5 different colors. And then it had eyes and a horn and hair. And I was doing that cake for 2 days with my sister and with my nieces. And so my agent was like, why don't you do a book about baking cakes? And I was like, no, I don't really want to do that. And then I thought, hang on, I have a witch. And she appears as one of the characters in Gustavo. Yes. And witches like baking, witches bake gingerbread houses, witches bake gingerbread men. Maybe I can just have fun and write a story that has lots of witches, and I can have fun because I love drawing witches. And then that's where I started. And as I was working on Layla, I drew a little vampire character and I loved him very much. I didn't have a story yet for him, but I knew I wanted to do a book with a vampire as well. And I started doing a PhD project researching horror in the children's picture book. So it all came together. The first book was meant to be a standalone picture book, but as I carried on working on other projects, I came up with more ideas.
Interesting. Because I will touch on the PhD study at some point, but you've talked about an agent now, and I'm going to walk back to a question. So MA Walker Books, came calling. You got to deal with them. At what point did the agents come into the picture? Did the agent come into the picture at that point where you were signing something with Walker Books, or did you eventually just find someone? And the reason why I ask this is because I have spoken to a number of illustrators also who have mentioned finding an agent as their big break, because apparently, it's a big thing in the industry. And so for those who are new to the industry or who are just learning about the industry, even for someone like myself, how did you come about that relationship, with the agent?
So my best friend, Erika Meza, she also lives in the UK, and she also Mexican. And she's a picture book maker as well. She's very successful. She has this wonderful book called To the Other Side about children migrating. So Erica was the one who was chasing Claire. Claire is our agent. And then we both ended up living in the UK for different reasons. After, we met in Paris. We were not just housemates, but we were roommates because we were renting a studio together. And we went to the same uni. We became best friends. And after finishing that year in Paris, she stayed in Paris and I went back to Mexico. And when I moved in the UK 2 years later to do the MA in children's book illustrations, she moved back in the UK. So we kind of reprised our friendship. And we traveled to Bologna, and Erica introduced me to Claire, who is her agent. And Claire liked me, and she asked me if I wanted her to be my agent, and I said yes. And I've been with her for the last maybe 5 years. Well, no, 4 years, since 2018. No, 6 years. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, time flies. Time
6 years.
flies. Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Now, having spoken of Erica and your Mexican background, what are the cultural influences on your art? Do you draw any influences from your Mexican background? Yeah.
Yes. So there are lots of references in my work. There are cultural references to celebrations like Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
There or different parties. In Oaxaca, there's this thing called calendas, which is where musicians go to the street and they play tunes, and it's like a little parade that happens when, I don't know, people get married, and then they organize a calenda and they're walking around the city and musicians are playing instruments, and there are these massive puppets called mojicangas that are just walking around the city, and it's all very colorful and very fun. There are references to that. The architecture, that the type of houses that you can see in Mexico or in Oaxaca appear in my books. Even the types of the little objects in the house are inspired by Mexican folk art. There are some characters that have a Mexican origin, like a Catrina. And there's a little lady skull with a big hat in Gustavo the Shy Ghost. She's a character that is very characteristic from Mexico. I don't know if you've seen them, but people paint their faces like skulls, and then they wear fancy dresses, and they said that's their Catrina costume.
Okay.
It started as a print, and then that print kind of mutated and evolved, and now you can have Catrinas as sculptures, as costumes, as masks, as many different things. And there's, in Layla, one of the witches is a witch that turns into a ball of fire, which is a Mexican legend, and another witch turns into an owl, which is a lechuza, which is also a Mexican folk tale. So there's folk tales, there's celebrations, there's architecture, there's objects, there's art, there's anything and everything that I can include in a way in which it feels organic or integral to the story. I will build it in, as long as it's not distracting.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, though. And I should ask at this point, and this is going back to something that I saw during the London Book Fair where I listened to you speak. I remember just seeing, the visuals on the screen, and it looks to me like beyond what you've seen or what you encountered when you were growing up, in terms of your background, there is a bit of or not a bit, there is some research to some of these things also. So I should ask you formally, do you go in depth at researching some of these things for your works? You're researching Mexican folklores, or are they, for example, things that you just heard from? If I can relate if I can relate my experience to this, African folklores I learned from my grandparents, for example. So, in terms of your works and how they, how you use them, do you research beyond just what you heard from your grandparents, then include them in your works? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think I also, after Gustavo, I started paying more attention to the things that I was researching, because I knew I wanted to do a PhD, and I wanted to do a PhD in horror. So in a way, the research that I'm doing for the PhD influenced the work that I ended up doing for my books. And when I was working on Vlad, by the time when I started making that book, I had already done a lot of research into vampires as we know them nowadays, because they didn't used to be the fancy characters that now we recognize. They used to be more like zombies that would come back from the dead, and that would basically kill your family. Kill their own family. And I think that started as, tuberculosis spreading in Scotland. When you have tuberculosis, you cough a lot of blood.
Yeah.
And it's very, very contagious. And a lot of people died because of tuberculosis. So they were putting the bodies in crypts. But because people were dying very quickly, whenever they went back in to put another body, they discovered, oh, this person hasn't disintegrated. It's still intact. It must be undead. When actually it was just really cold, so the bodies wouldn't decompose. So there was a lot of folklore around vampires like that. Like they would spread disease, but they weren't fancy and they weren't elegant. That happened much later with Polidori. Jean Polidori wrote a story called The Vampire, I think. I can't remember the name, but his character is inspired by Lord Byron, who was very handsome and very seductive and very charming. So that's kind of like the birth of modern vampires as fancy characters. And then before Dracula, there were a few novellas with kind of lesbian vampires. So Vlad has two moms, which are inspired by these previous novellas. One of them is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. The other one is Christabel. I can't remember the name of the author. So and there's also Kamazots, which is like a god for the Aztecs, is from the underworld, and it's a vampire. So I started just adding those things in the background of the story, and it kind of became part of the story because Vlad is a fanciful vampire. He loves fashion. He wants to be pretty. He wants to be elegant. He wants to be cute. So it kind of made sense to have him being a character who loves fashion.
Interesting. So it's not just Mexican, then it actually cuts across in terms of your research and your influences then, because I've heard, a reference to, Lord Byron and, I think Scots or something about, this whole vampire thing. So that's interesting. Do you have any other artistic influences or mentors when it comes to your illustrations?
Mentors when it comes to illustration?
Yeah, your influences. Do you have any other influences, people you look up to, or mentors that you, I don't know, that you work with, or that inspire or influence your work? Sorry. Yeah.
I think definitely Martin Salisbury, who is my supervisor, has been a very, very big influence to me, and I've learned so much from reading his books. I was reading this book, children's picture books, The Art of Visual Storytelling.
Oh, nice. Okay.
This is a new edition. The previous edition had a different cover. I bought that book before I went to Paris, and I read that book. And after I read that book, that's when I discovered this massive role that illustration has in picture books, which is not just as decorative, but as integral part of the story. And I discovered that idea in one of his books, and ever since that happened, I started trying to apply that as much as possible within my own work. So he's been very, very important to me. And there's, of course, many illustrators who I admire. I like Beatrice Alemagna has this wonderful gestural work. Actually, she made the cover for this book.
Okay. Interesting.
As well. I really like the work by Julia Sarda. She makes incredible characters with lots of personality, interesting compositions. I like how fun and a bit creepy the books of John Klassen are. I don't know. I like. There's many
of them,
illustrators who I admire and who I just wish I had
Hmm.
their talent.
Ah, interesting. And they wish, well, some of us also wish we had your talent. So it cuts across. And then your experience across different environments. You've talked about Mexico. I have had Paris. I've had England. The UK. So how have you been able to, straddle these multiple worlds, as an artist, from Mexico to the UK to Paris? Is that something about how you've been able to live or relate as an artist across these different environments?
I I was not doing that consciously. I was just working on things that interested me and on things that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, in Mexico, we have a lot of culture that comes from the UK and the US, lots of literature that gets there,
Mm-hmm.
and film. So my work is and has been inspired and fed by all of these different references, which kind of just blended in. But it's
Okay.
mostly because I work on things that interest me, on things that I find amusing, on things that I found fun, or maybe making the books that I would have liked to have as a child.
Okay.
And I think if you work on things that you have fun with, if you work on things that you enjoy, it's more likely that other people are also going to connect with that work.
Mm-hmm. And is that what you've seen across these different places, though? I mean, across these different environments, you found people that you can connect with on the basis of your work? Your works.
Yes, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So coming to your books now, I mean, I read Layla the Perfect Witch, and obviously having listened to you speak at the London Book Fair, it's obvious that your medium of expression or medium of creative expression includes, monsters and witches and horrors, which I find fascinating, I should say. But I do wonder though, is there anything that spooks you, Flavia? Is there anything that gives you the creeps?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I get scared much less now
Mhm.
than I used to when I was a child. But when I was a child, the things that scared me the most were ghosts. Like
Mhm.
this idea of being trapped between worlds without having resolution, without being able to rest, and being forever angry
Mhm.
or sad. I found that really, really disturbing. And also, when I was a child, I was terrified of aliens. I watched these shows. I don't know if you've ever watched them. It was called Unsolved Mysteries.
Mm.
Maybe maybe you're very young, but
Or old.
don't think so.
Yeah.
But there was an episode where people get UFO abductions.
Mm.
I watched that when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and then
Mhm.
I didn't want. I was just really scared of looking through the window. I thought, "Ooh, what if I'm in my bed and then a UFO comes and takes me away?" That was really scary. I didn't like.
Ah, but the things that would normally scare some of us, right, are the things that you enjoy drawing. I mean, vampires and witches and stuff. So yeah, I'm just wondering. Then, I would have thought that that would spook you, but it doesn't, obviously. And how did that even come about? How did you come about that fascination with ghosts and monsters and horror?
I don't. I think it. Horror is like Marmite. You like it or not, and
Yeah.
you taste it, and then you want to have more of it.
Hmm.
I do think that in my house, my mom enjoyed taking us to see macabre things, and also I was raised Catholic. And Catholic Church is quite gory and creepy and scary, and it's like if you see images of saints or Jesus, they're like just dismembered people, flayed people. It's quite gruesome and scary. And then if you grow up as a Mexican, you know that at least what we know from Aztecs is that there were lots of sacrifices. Hearts were being plucked out of chests and offered to the gods so that the world could carry on. Otherwise, the world would die, which is quite scary as well.
Wow.
So you get told all these ideas, which are kind of like culture. They're not horror.
Well, true.
But they're actually scary.
Yeah, the same perspectives,
I
right?
think horror is more like a label that helps people to sell and commercialize certain goods, certain kinds of films. But it's also an emotion that happens to be in lots of things that happen in everyday life. So I grew up being surrounded by lots of horror-like experiences, and then I discovered there were horror films. In Mexico, there was Channel 5, and in the 90s, when I was growing up, I don't know why, but there were horror films in broad daylight. You could, they were playing.
Oh God, not at night.
They were playing It. They were playing The Omen. They were playing Chucky. They were playing Gremlins.
Oh wow, I know Chucky very well.
Love, like B-series films, horror films, broad daylight, and I just watched those films because they were on TV, and I was not the only one. There was lots of children in my generation who watched those films.
And you were not scared when you watched Chucky?
I was scared.
Oh, okay.
Very, very scared. Yeah. And then my brother played a prank on me. Like I had a doll, and I went out, and he moved the doll and make her stand on the middle of my desk, and I was terrified. And I think the film that scared me the most was It. I had to shower with my eyes open, looking at the drain hole.
Oh, interesting. But I read somewhere though that your favorite genre of movies is actually horror now, right? I think I read in one of your interviews when I was doing the research in you that so you watch like every night or every weekend, or how does it work with you now with horror movies?
What? Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah. So I read somewhere when I was doing a bit of research on you, I read that you love watching horror movies. So I'd assume that's your favorite genre when it comes to movies, horrors. Is that? So I'm just asking, do you watch horror movies? How frequently do you watch horror movies now?
Quite frequently, actually.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. Just 2 days ago, I watched this film called Infinity Pool by Brandon Cronenberg, and I thought it was quite a strange film. And the thing about horror is that it's a genre that keeps evolving and keeps finding new ways to tell things about everyday life in a way that is more extreme. But it's about society. It's about us. Horror tells stories of power and trauma and grief in a way that is more metaphorical, maybe. Like The Babadook. The Babadook is a metaphor for grief. Is a woman who is very sad because her husband died. So she starts having visions of this monster who is kind of embodying the sadness of that, of losing her husband. So I think some horror films do it better than others. Others are just also there's also films that are just blood and guts and fun, and you just want to see how explosive someone's death is going to be. And there's a certain craft to that as well.
Interesting perspective. So my next question is around something that you touched on at the London Book Fair once again, and again the context is your creative, expressions, horrors, maybe devil or witches or vampires. Which again, I understand that those are your creative expressions, and so but then they do have different connotations across cultures. I can speak to my culture. I'm from the Yoruba culture. It's an African culture, West African culture, and witches connotes, you know, darkness and something bad that some other people have to conquer. There's all this spiritualism around the whole thing, and I just wonder, given that your books cut across audiences. I'm one of your fans now, for example. Have you noticed any cultural nuances in terms of how your work is interpreted or perceived or received? Have you noticed anything or any pushback from anyone, for example?
Mhm. Yes, well, I was aware of the fact that when you use characters that might be perceived as scary or demonic in a way, because
Yeah.
witches tend to get associated with Satan
Yeah.
and selling your soul and that kind of thing. I was aware that there were maybe some people were going to be uncomfortable about that. To me, witches are more about being powerful, wise females who got accused, maybe because they were gaining too much power. Obviously, that's how I see witches, but that doesn't mean that everyone sees witches as I see them. So I've had there was a review that was saying that Layla has a lovely story, but this person didn't like that there were lots of pentagrams in the book because pentagrams are satanic. But first of all, inverted pentagrams are satanic. The other way around, I think it's a symbol of change and femininity. So there's nothing satanic about pentagrams themselves. And it all depends on culture, because what represents femininity and power in one culture can represent evil and darkness in another culture.
True.
And you can never please everyone.
I agree.
So I was just doing what I wanted to do. And then for Vlad, I think I also looked at a few reviews who said that the book had an agenda. And if the agenda is to be inclusive and welcoming of an understanding of everyone, and fine, then I did have an agenda, but I was mostly telling a story of accepting who you are and what you look like, and about being it's about self-love, really. But the thing with picture books is that sometimes people, like different people, can make different interpretations, and they will have different values, and again, you can't please everyone. But you need to work on, I think I just want to work on things that interest me.
Okay, interesting. So what I get from you is you're conscious of the connotations of some of these things, but for you, it's just an art, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, thanks for answering that. In terms of your works, I'm really keen to hear about your PhD, which is an interesting subject that you're dealing with. So my questions around that are: what exactly what exactly is your PhD about? What exactly are you trying to achieve? What processes are involved using your works as a basis, and what might eventual impact be? I can take that again because I have them on my screen. So let's start with your PhD. What is it about? I think it's an interesting subject from what I know, but I'll let you just share with us.
Oh dear, that's the thing that I'm trying to figure out. But basically, I know what my PhD is on. I'm researching horror as a genre in the children's picture book,
Mm-hmm.
and as the research evolved, I came to realize that horror is like a little mutant that has changed over time, and it has mutated to become all sorts of products. It's toys, it's costumes, it's film, it's books, and picture books are not the exception. So what I was trying to understand was how I, as an author illustrator,
Mm-hmm.
have used different horror tropes or characters or emotions in my own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, I discovered that there's also other people doing the same. So it's like horror as a genre
Mm-hmm.
is a genre that is focused on creating a reaction from its audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about setting as much as it is about getting a reaction, and in this case is a reaction of fear and shock or even disgust. So within the context of picture books, you would maybe think that's not the goal, but there are different kinds of picture books, and some picture books do use fear as some sort of pedagogical tool.
Mm-hmm.
And other picture books like mine, we kind of use different tropes and characters and turn them into stories that don't want to necessarily scare our audience.
I agree.
But those are common themes, and it's like having animal characters. Like, think about fables. You have different animals in fables, and animals embody different qualities. For instance, a turtle is slow, a fox is cunning, a hare is hasty, an ant is hardworking. And so I thought that with my books, what I've been doing is I've been using the qualities of certain monsters to create stories with that as point of departure. So that's what I've been trying to elaborate on in my thesis.
Okay. What is the and what might eventual impact be? So when you're done with the PhD, how impactful would it be in terms of its maybe everyday use? Would that be in academia? Would that be in the entire industry? What's the potential impact of that?
I don't know. I think it's really hard to tell with PhDs in art. I don't know what the impact is going to be. To be honest, again, I'm doing it because I'm interested in the topic, and because I want to become. I'd like to be a lecturer at uni, and nowadays you need to be very qualified in order to get a part-time position, in a university. So it's like I'm doing it because it's interesting, and I'm doing it because I'm doing it because I find it interesting, and I'm doing it because doing a PhD is a means to an end. I'm not doing it because I'm thinking, "Oh, this will change the world," because I don't think it will, and I don't think a lot of people will read the whole document. I think I was reading an article that says that half a person reads a whole PhD from the beginning to end, and one of them is the supervisor.
Yeah, interesting. Which is why I've asked you, because again, it's me trying to get an understanding. I mean, I don't have a PhD, so I'm just trying to understand. I mean, how just thinking about this PhD in, because yours is fascinating again. I mean, horrors and picture books. What is she
What I
trying to
think
achieve? Yeah.
PhDs like mine do,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about mine, but I'm talking about PhDs that are written from the point of view of the artists
Yeah.
do,
Mm-hmm.
are that we provide the point of view from whoever is making the picture books, because there's a lot and lot of research done from the point of view of the reviewer, from the
Mm-hmm.
point of view of the psychologist, from the point of view of the educator for children.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has done research on picture books, but picture book makers,
Ah, I
which
see
I
what you
think
meant.
is. I just think it's important there's research on picture books done by makers, because we know the craft and we can maybe write about certain things that people
Mm,
can't.
mm,
What we've been doing at the Center for Children's Book Research in Anglia Ruskin University is mostly write about the process. We write about picture books before they are finished. We write about all those things that people will not get to see when they see the published version.
mm-hmm.
Because what most academia has done has been they look at a picture book, they study the images, they see how people react, how children react when they read the book, but they don't know anything about how it came to be. So
Ah,
we are
okay.
kind of trying to unveil how that picture book came to be by showing discarded images, conversations with publishers, insights,
Mm-hmm.
challenges, all those things,
Hmm.
which can only be done if you are the one who is making a picture book.
Yeah, interested. This is interesting. I think this gives a bit more context to your response also. And correct me if I'm wrong. And in this instance, because you're writing using your books as a basis, and your books as a basis means that, of course, you're looking at the monsters and the vampires and all these, other features. Is that what then pointed you in the direction of researching what certain things connotes in different cultures? Is that part of the whole thing, the whole process for your PhD?
No, that was something I was doing anyway before I started the PhD. I
Okay.
think when I started doing the PhD, I just began to pay more attention to the things that I was already doing, and maybe I began to do some other things more consciously.
Okay.
Like if I was working on a book about vampires, then I would do more research on vampires. If I was working on a book about witches, I would do more research on witches,
Mm.
historical witches, and then I would see if I could integrate those things into my picture books. But I
Oh.
was doing that anyway with Gustavo, because there's lots of horror characters in my picture book, and most of them came from Universal Monsters films,
Oh, okay.
which were very, very popular in the 1930s. I don't know if you've seen them. Probably you have. They're just massive, like Bride of Frankenstein with Elsa,
Yeah, yeah.
with the hair that goes all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Those were very influential films, and you can see the influence of those films sometimes in my picture books, and I was doing that already.
Mm.
What I began to do since I started the PhD was began to pay more attention.
Okay,
If
interesting.
that
So
makes sense.
yeah, it does. So my last question on that then is: so if at the end of the day, your PhD thesis would include references to these things that you've mentioned, right? This research works on, this movies and the rest of them, right? Ah, okay, cool. In terms of your affiliations, Flavia, do you have any professional organizations that you're a part of that have an influence also on your career or have an impact on your career?
I didn't understand that question. What do you mean
Mhm.
by
Ah,
affiliations?
okay. So I should mention to you. So when I started my journey as a self-published author here in the UK, I felt like I was working in isolation, and then I would ask around, oh, are there professional organizations or associations that I could join? And someone introduced me to Scooby, Society of Children's Book Writers and
Mm.
Illustrators. Yeah. So that's and I have seen the influence of Scooby on my growing career, I should say. So I'm always curious to find out from artists and authors like your children's book writers and authors like yourself, authors and illustrators like yourself, if you belong to any of these organizations like Scooby and what impact they've had on your journey.
No, I don't belong to any organization like that. Maybe the closest organization that I can that had an influence in me was my university, Anglia Ruskin University, where I did the MA. That probably had a massive influence on who I am right now as an illustrator, as an author, as how do I think about research, how do I think about illustration, how do I think about many things.
Mm-hmm.
So probably that's the closest I have to an organization that I have
Ah,
links with.
okay, interesting. So I think that feeds right into my next question, which is about, the business side of things for you. So your MA, you've talked about, helping to terms of polish your craft, the underlying theories behind illustrations and stuff. Was there anything about building a sustainable living out of this, from your MA? Was there anything about businesses and the business of children's book illustration and the likes that you also picked up?
Yes, I knew the MA had links and partnerships with other publishers. I knew there was a big exhibition at the end of when we graduate. We set up a big exhibition in London where publishers go, and maybe they like you have a unique opportunity
Mm-hmm.
where you will have lots and lots of publishers going to the place where your work is being showcased,
Mm-hmm.
which is much harder if you try to send emails to publishers. Maybe they will just not pay attention because they're busy and they're already dealing with their projects. Maybe some of them will be hunting for new talent.
Mm-hmm.
You never know. So this is why you must carry on emailing, even if you didn't get an answer in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So that exhibition was an interesting point of entry for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Bologna. There's a stand. The university travels to Bologna Book Fair with a stand where your projects are being showcased, and maybe publishers from the world will go and have a look at your books, and maybe one of them will get interested and you get an email and you get more chances to get your work out
Mm-hmm.
there. So from the business side point of view,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was just a place that could provide me with opportunities that otherwise I wouldn't have.
Interesting. And in terms of businesses and your, services, what are you currently offering in terms of as an artist? So you sell. I mean, your books sell, and you make money from that. Are there other? I know about your domestic costs, for example. Are there other service offerings? Are there other products or services that you make a living from that you want to share with us?
Yes, sometimes in October I do some events, workshops, and you can get extra money from those workshops
Mm-hmm.
or events. You can register your books at PLR, Public Lending Right, with the British Library.
Library, yeah.
And every time your books get borrowed, you might get a tiny commission,
Mm-hmm.
but that can earn you a little bit more money. I
Mm-hmm.
did a Domestica course, which came out in 2020, and I still get a little bit of money every month. So it's bits here and there. I haven't done any commissioned work for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But the last project I did was a Day of the Dead collection for Target. They contacted me because they saw Gustavo and they were interested in me developing their Day of the Dead collection. I don't know. You can work depending on the kind of agent that you have. You can either have a literary agent or an illustration agent. And if you have an illustration agent, maybe they'll be able to get you different types of gigs, like illustrating, doing illustrations for packaging, or doing illustrations for advertising, or doing illustrations for an app, things like that. I've been mostly doing I've been mostly working with my books and doing the PhD, which takes just all of my time.
And so this incomes from this, domestica and your books, can we then say that they sustain you?
No, I've been very lucky. I've been mostly earning from my picture books, and I also got a scholarship for doing the PhD, which it's like my monthly allowance that's going to end at some point. But it's that, and I've been doing some teaching as well, teaching illustration. Okay. So between all of that, I earn my living, but most of my income comes from my picture books.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And in terms of your current and future projects, Flavia, what are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on a project about a haunted house, where children get in this haunted house and they're not supposed to. So again, it's kind of touching into horror. Obviously, but it's outside the world of Gustavo, so it's a standalone book. It's not part of that same world. It's a different book, but I'm working on that. We're developing it at the moment. We're developing the story. We're creating the atmosphere. So it's that, and I'm working on 2 more board books for babies that also have monsters. And then after I'm done with my PhD, I'm gonna be doing a picture book of monsters. It's like an ABC picture book with monsters from Mexico and Latin America, which I'm very excited about. And so that's it.
Interesting. Well, so that one is actually part of your future plans, because I was going to ask about your future plans. And so, the ABC books will be, it's part of your future plans, right? Yes. And then teaching also, because you've talked about your PhD as a means to an end, and that end being, getting into the world of academia where you're lecturing or teaching students. Is that part of your future plans also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been applying to jobs as a lecturer, and I think you have a slightly better chance if you have a PhD. You also need to be prepared. You need to be an expert in the topic that they're asking a lecturer for. So, yeah.
Interesting. All the best with that, though. So staying with that, do you have any wish list of collaborations, though? Do you have any, I'd love to work with this person. I would love to, work with that person. Do you have a few of what? Do you have any of those?
Well, I would love to make books with Enchanted Lion or with Chronicle Books. I think they make really, really nice books. There's this new imprint called Unruly. They make picture books for adults. If the opportunity comes, I would love to do a picture book that is just for adults. So yeah.
And just to make sure that I get that correctly, this picture books for adults, would it be spooky also? Would it include vampires, and would it still be the same creative expressions that you fancy, or that I know that we know
I
you
don't know.
for?
I don't have an idea of what those picture books would be about, but I think I would like to make a picture book that is not for children. That might be
Ah.
an interesting challenge.
Wait, so just to make sure that I get this across correctly, so are you saying that if an opportunity comes to work on a picture book that doesn't involve vampires or horrors, it's also something that you can do or be willing to do?
Yeah, of
So
course. I don't only make picture books with vampires and monsters. That's what I've been doing.
mhm.
But I can make picture books about anything, really.
Okay, interesting. Okay, interesting. And in terms of your work-life balance, Flavia, what do you do when you're not drawing or writing?
I have a garden. I'm a garden enthusiast. I have a little allotment, so I grow vegetables,
Hmm.
and that kind of requires a lot of time because, especially in the beginning of the season when you need to plant everything,
Hmm.
and then mid-season you need to plant everything in their final growing spot. But I like that gardening is a slow motion activity, just like making picture books is. You do something little every single day, and by the end of the season, you have the things that you can eat, or you have a picture book. And I find that process very enjoyable. And because it's not connected to art in a way,
Mm-hmm.
it allows me to have a break.
Interesting. And so if you go to Mexico also, do you have a garden there also that you plant in? Oh,
I didn't
oh,
have a garden before I moved in the UK.
so how did that
I
interest
think
come
the
about?
UK is massive in gardening.
I agree with
Mexico
you.
is not, but here you go to Sainsbury's, and there's everything for your garden.
I
Just
agree 100%. Yeah.
it's not as big in Mexico. Also, Mexico City. Sadly, at the moment, there's a problem with water supply.
Hmm.
So the city sometimes goes by with days without water, and
Oh,
if you
wow.
want to have a garden, you need to have water to watering your plants, otherwise nothing will grow.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. And I should
So
ask, oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
so gardening in Mexico is more difficult than gardening here.
Yeah. Besides gardening, any other thing that you do out of curiosity?
Yes, I go to the gym at
Oh,
least half an hour every day. I do some
mhm.
strength training.
Oh, wow.
Lift my weights is very good for your muscles, is very good for your bone
Wow.
density. And I like cooking as well, cook with my partner. And yeah, that's it.
Oh, oh, nice. Okay. I was going to ask you about, your when you harvest the stuffs that you grow, do you give them out or do you cook everything? I don't know.
Sometimes, like if you're planting courgettes, they grow very
Mm-hmm.
quickly, and you can grow lots of them. So you have to give some of them away. With other things like pumpkins, you can grow a pumpkin over 4 months, and by the end of those 4 months, you will only have one.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep it and eat it, or use it for whatever
Halloween,
you
right?
want to use it for.
Okay.
Peas. I don't know. My allotment is not very big.
Okay.
It's enough for having food for me and my partner, but we have a big fig tree, and that fig tree, like, we can't eat all of those figs, so we give figs to the neighbors. I planted sunflowers last year, and there was this sunflower that went mad and grew like 20 heads,
Oh.
and I had to cut them all at once because there was a wind. There was a very windy day, and that the wind just killed the sunflower plant. So I had to cut most of the heads, and I ended up giving some to the neighbors, some to my friend. I kept some.
Interesting. Well, so Flavia, where can people find you? I mean, I I got to find you at the London Book Fair. And so, but if you had people who are looking to work with you or invite you over for events, and I imagine there are lots of them out there, how might they go about that?
I have an Instagram account. It's Flavia _Z Drago, Drago. You can find me. You can Google my name, Flavia Drago, and it shows my website. And then on my website, I have a new section that is called frequently asked questions, which is if you have events, you can email my publishers in the UK. If you have a project, you should email my agent. And if for anything else, you can just click and email me.
Interesting.
So on my website or on Instagram, people can find me on Instagram. I have a Twitter account, but I only tweet in Spanish. And ever since Twitter became X, I don't tweet anymore. I just don't like that.
Yeah. It's not uncommon though. I mean, I've seen this. I've heard this from a number of people, and I can also be a witness to that, because I mean, even myself, I deleted my previous account, and then I opened a new one. But I don't know. I think I just sailed on from enjoying Twitter for what it was. So, anyways, I think it's history now. LinkedIn.
I don't like it anymore.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Flavia.
Sorry.
LinkedIn?
I don't have LinkedIn. No. I think I have a Threads account, which is like the new Twitter. I don't tweet a lot. I used to be a massive fan of spending time on Twitter, but then they did something to the algorithm, and suddenly, if I was making a thing that I liked doing was writing silly jokes.
Oh, okay.
And then you would have random people that will tell you, oh, that's not possible. That's not scientifically possible. And it's like, I know.
It's a joke.
I'm not trying to write a science paper. I'm trying to make a joke. And I just found that so frustrating and annoying. I stopped writing on Twitter.
Wow. Interesting. Any reason why you didn't get on LinkedIn or not? Any
No,
reason?
I don't have LinkedIn.
Okay. Any reason?
I don't think I need it.
Okay. Fair enough. And then tips for artists who are looking to follow in your footsteps. Yep.
Well, tip number 1 is if you want to make picture books, and if you want to illustrate picture books, draw a lot. Draw from life. Draw from your imagination. Draw things you care about. Draw things that you find inspiring. Create your stories based on your own experiences, and if you enjoy them, again, it's more likely other people will connect to them. Or if you want to make a book about something you think is very important, then do it, because if you think it's important, maybe you're not alone.
Yeah. Okay. Is that any other tips for people, or that's it?
That's it, I would say, for now.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you very much, Flavia. It's been an exciting time talking with you. Thank you again for coming on board. Yeah, very interesting thing here. I will end.
It was fun. I had a lot of fun. You're very good at interviewing. You're very good at listening.
Oh, nice.
And thank you for inviting me to have a chat with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find all the links in the podcast description. Make sure to follow the Creatives Across Borders podcast and stay tuned for the next episode. Until then, bye.